having all that information that I was seeing for the first time, I felt like I never truly like sat down and like focused because I was just so nervous because like it's this huge thing and everyone makes such a big deal about it. And even like the schools, whether they mean to or not, are like so pressuring on you about it. And they're like, you need to pass, you need to pass, you need to pass. And then like you never get time to like take a breath and just be like, okay, like it's just an exam.
That is veterinarian Dr. Alexia Mazzarella. And this is the VIN Foundation's Veterinary Pulse podcast. I'm Jordan Ben-Shia, Executive Director of the VIN Foundation. Join me as I talk with veterinary colleagues about critical topics and share stories. Stories that connect us as humans, as animals, as a veterinary community. This podcast is made possible by individuals like you who donate to the VIN Foundation. Thank you. Please check the episode notes for bios, links, and information mentioned. Welcome, Alexia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being willing to share your story with us. As I said when we first started talking, I feel like our stories are the most important thing that we have, and sharing them is a way that we can connect. And now more than ever, the connection is so important. So thanks for being willing to come on here and share your story.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yay. So we like to kind of start off with just like, was there an aha moment for you with veterinary medicine? Or if you'll share, your journey to veterinary medicine. Were you a kid and always knew, or what brought you to this profession?
Yeah, so I feel like I share the same kind of experiences as a lot of in the profession of being a child and wanting to become a veterinarian. For me, it was fourth grade, actually. So there's a picture of me in a Halloween costume dressed up as a vet with a stethoscope holding it to my stuffed yellow Labrador retriever. And I think it was ultimately my very first dog that I had growing up. As my childhood dog, we had to bring him to Cornell. And I remember just walking into the veterinary hospital and just being like completely mesmerized by everything that was like there and like all the doctors. And I remember the doctor came out and like talked to us about kind of the diagnosis. And his was like a little strange. I don't think they ever really like found out what was wrong with him. And so then I was like, I'm going to be that vet that like finds out what's wrong with the animal that like no one else can. And so I think since then, I kind of set my mind to it. And then since a Halloween costume, I just continued to go to like summer camps at like the local like Penn State campuses to learn more about the vet med industry. And then started as a kennel assistant in a veterinary clinic, and then kind of like worked my way up to veterinary assistant. And then I went to Penn State for undergrad and did veterinary and biomedical sciences as the major. I definitely had a couple like life crises where I was like, I don't know if I could do it during then, but ultimately stuck it out and then applied to vet school after undergrad.
So what was that? Do you think like during those life crises, what was it that held you steadfast?
I think with actually, I was lucky to be able to go to Penn State because we had a lot of, I think, opportunities and resources with our per vet club. And it kind of like showed us all the different pathways. So I think the things that I had found that interest me were all very like similar. It was like chemical engineering or like biochemistry with like the business side. And then I think through pre-vet club, I realized, like I can do all these things through vet med. And like there's so much variety within this profession. And I think that's kind of what grounded me is you're never stuck. And there's so many different pathways that you can take. And so I was lucky to be able to like have those speakers come and kind of show us the different pathways that you could take. And then for me too, was actually always the people aspect. I really like networking with people and talking to people. And so I was like, I want to be in a place where I can have that connection with people. And, those like quizzes that you take, it's always like, it would always say like, I should be a therapist or like a teacher. And so I think like you could kind of be all of those things within vet med, like, cause you are kind of a therapist talking to connecting with people that the pets don't have a voice. So you're speaking for the voiceless. You're also speaking with people on a daily basis. And sometimes you're the only person that they can talk to throughout the day if it's like an older client. So I think you can kind of be a teacher as well to other people and mentor them. So I feel like there's just so many different facets of the profession that it so got me excited and had me stay and put my head down and keep studying and get into vet school.
Well, and I think that that's having a well-rounded approach like that is very helpful, not just, I
Yeah.
mean, in all aspects of life, right? And the
Mhm.
fact that you were so interested in all the different aspects really makes it more like a more rounded career for you versus just
Yeah.
I really loved bunnies, or
Yeah.
my stuffed
Yeah.
Labrador in fourth grade.
Yeah. Obviously, I love the animals, but it was
Obviously, you love the animals, right? But I think the love for the animals is the part that can get really hard, right? Because of all the different
yeah.
facets and the people and finances and everything. But
Mhm.
having that other interest in humans is a really vital part of it as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So you got that great experience at Penn State. I think definitely the pre-vet clubs we hear can be so helpful, and it's always fascinating to me. It's almost like this underground network of pre-vet clubs because there's APVMA, but it seems like there's in general, it's so hard to reach all the pre-vets.
Mhm.
And there are so many pre-vet clubs, multiple different ones at so many different schools that it's kind of hard to like track them all down, but they
Yeah.
can be really a great resource. I know that at UC Davis, I've heard that they're also very helpful there, and probably the schools that have, vet schools then
Mhm.
or, have stronger pre-vet programs. So after Penn State undergrad, where did you go to veterinary school? Did you go immediately? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I did. I applied while I was at Penn State during my senior year. So I actually applied like right before COVID hit. So I was actually
Wow.
able to do my interviews. I applied to 6 schools. I got into two, Mississippi State and Michigan State. And so it was like February that
Of
I got
2020?
of 2020 that I
Uh-huh.
interviewed at Michigan State. And then Mississippi, I think, was like January. So
Mm-hmm.
that was really interesting experience because it was like that hit. And then I remember the day I got my acceptance to vet school was the day that my graduation got canceled. So it was like very bittersweet. So I remember like crying and then like crying again for the reason. So
Right,
it
right.
was kind of like a up and down experience, but I did go right after school. For me, I decided that because I feel like if I stopped, I like might not keep going. So, but I know a lot of people that like took a year off and like got very valuable experience by doing so. So there's definitely different ways you can do it. But I think a lot of it too was, I guess, going back to the pre-vet club, we held symposium at Penn
Mm-hmm.
State my junior
Mm-hmm.
year, which was super helpful for kind of getting to know the different vet schools and like um, where to apply to and like which programs I'd be more interested in. So ultimately, after my big pro con list, I decided to go to Michigan State University because of their flipped classroom setting. And I'll probably touch more on that in the later questions, but that ultimately is kind of what interests me because I, during my junior year, did a internship on a dairy farm, and I kind of learned
Mm-hmm.
that the way that I learned best was a hands-on way, and so the flipped classroom really attracted me because they had said we would be like doing labs and you would have less lecture time and more hands-on time. So that really kind of
Mm-hmm.
got me there, and it was a little bit closer to home than Mississippi State, so that was also nice too to be able to kind of come home in a day. But both were out of state, and so finances were kind of even comparing them, but
Okay, that
um,
I was going to ask you if finances were a part of it as well.
it was, yeah. We actually got lucky because my year at Michigan State, they had like a reduction in the tuition for
Mm-hmm.
out of state students. So it ended up being almost like even for Mississippi State versus Michigan State. And so that was not as big of a factor just because it was already equal. But
Mm-hmm.
the out of state definitely is a big factor when thinking about schools. Um,
Absolutely. And what state were you in when you applied?
I was in Pennsylvania, so my in-state
Okay.
school was technically University of Pennsylvania,
Right.
but you don't
Which
really get
definitely
like
would have cost you more.
discount anyway. Yeah, so it is actually cheaper to go to both Michigan State and Mississippi State than it would have been to go to University of Pennsylvania.
Penn. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you grew up in Pennsylvania as well.
I did, yeah. I'm
Okay.
from the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area in a small town called Pittston, but I always say
Mm-hmm.
Scranton just because more people know where that is than
Yep.
my town. So
Okay, so you start school, you are a freshman at Michigan, and it is COVID lockdown.
yeah.
How does that go?
I still remember like the whole. So I finally move in to my apartment in Michigan. I moved like away from family. It's my first time living outside of Pennsylvania.
Uh,
I meet my roommate who I literally met on Facebook. And we move in, and like 3 days into school, they're like, okay, just kidding. Like, we're going completely online. It was like right before we were supposed to have our first like hands-on physical exam lab.
oh no.
Um, and we got the email that we would be having from this point on, we'd be having online classes. And it was like right after we paid tuition, right after everyone moved. So like we were kind of just stuck. And so we're like, okay. So um, that was how I remember my first like couple days going. And um, there wasn't really like certainty of if we were going to ever come back that year or not. So we didn't know like, should we go back home? Should we stay in Michigan? Like, so I decided to stay, but we ended up not going in at all for the rest of that year.
So you're 3 days in, you're about to go in for anatomy and get some hands on, and they're like, just JK, we're just going to switch totally to Zoom. And
Yep.
so were you and your roommate just in your apartment, just learning on Zoom?
Yeah, so we sometimes would share the computer, but most of the time you had to both be on there. And we
Mm-hmm.
were actually in different groups. So, like,
Oh
we would
gosh.
have some points where we would be able to go on together, and other points would be separately, and you would hear like the echo of one in the other side of the room.
Right.
And then we also had exams completely like in our rooms. And so like that was hard because I always take the full amount of time and my roommate always takes like the shortest amount of time. And so she would be done. And so I'd like hear her like banging around in the kitchen. I'd be like, hey, I'm not done. But you can't say anything because it's like the screen recording. And so that was an experience too of being able to take your exams in your bedroom and then
Right.
having everything on a Zoom screen essentially. And we had like speed dating, I remember, to try and like meet people um, because that was the only way to kind of get
Right,
to know
right. To
people.
meet your
Then.
classmates. I mean, because you
Yeah.
and your roommate probably, for better or worse, formed quite the bond.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We said that it was really hard to move away because I'm like, wow, we've really like been through the ringer together, and we got pretty
Yeah.
close just because. And thank God we got along because that would have been awful
Right.
if we didn't because we were like we didn't have a choice in the matter. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, how do you feel? I mean, I was going to say, how do you feel COVID positively or negatively impacted your school experience? I guess there's so much negative parts of that.
mhm.
Obviously, you're away from home for the first time, you're away from your family, you're living with what was a stranger and then fastly was becoming like your closest human.
Yeah.
And so, were there any positives that you felt from that experience?
Yeah, I had to really think about this one. But I think that because there was like the elimination of the travel time that you had to factor
Hmm.
into your day, you did a lot more time to do things. Well, you had a lot more time to study, so then you had a lot more time for other things, like because of
Right.
that. So I think because of that, I was kind of able to balance my days a little bit better and get more involved in organizations that I don't think I would have been able to have time to do had we like been in person. And so
Hmm.
I remember my mom being like, "How are you doing all these things?" But I got
You're like,
involved
because
like
I'm
right
not leaving my
away.
apartment. And that's
Yeah,
how.
and I'm so like extroverted too, so I was like, I need human interaction, and so that was another reason driving like my involvement. And so I got
Hmm.
like heavily involved in the Student American Veterinary Medical Association, and then the Veterinary Business Medical Association and or Management Association. And so um, that those were like my two main organizations, and then there was like all the other like smaller ones too of like the I had come in wanting to do mixed animal, so I was part of like the production animal club. And
Hmm.
um there was like another house system that we had. There was like the Purina student rep. So I just like threw myself
Yeah.
to everything just because I was like desperate to find human connection and try and form bonds with people and make
Right.
friends because it was just so isolating during that time, which was hard for me
Yeah.
as someone who like thrives off of human interaction. So those were the ways I think that were positive in the fact that it got me more involved right off the bat, and it got me those connections, and then just was able to like strengthen throughout the 4 years
Hmm.
after
So, based on all the places where you sort of dove in, And really hat tip to you, because a lot of people might, or some people might just be like so struggling. They're like, I don't even know if I want to. I
Mhm.
mean, I know for a lot of people, they sort of got more introverted from it. I definitely did from COVID.
Yeah.
Which ones did you find were a good fit for you?
I really like the SAVMA, which is the Student American Veterinary Medical Association.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I was actually I had tried to, so I was a delegate the first year, and like as a delegate, you go, and we did in our first year, but then the second year was able to go serve in the House of Delegates. And to me, like I really enjoyed that because you got to meet people from all different schools and kind of like hear their experiences, and that kind of made me realize that like I wasn't alone after feeling so
Mm-hmm.
alone for the whole year before that.
Mm-hmm.
So one, it got me like within my local school community, but then shortly after that, I realized like how connected you were to all the rest of the vet school communities, and like this profession is so small that I feel like once you go to one conference, you see like the same faces, and so that was kind of the beginning of me realizing how important it was to keep those connections with all the different vet schools. And I did really like the veterinary um, business management association too,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought that really taught me a lot of like practical business skills.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad is a business owner, so I kind of like grew up with that in the mindset of the business, and probably wanting to own a business like in the future. So that was super helpful too with learning those practical skills and realizing that it is possible to own a business, just because with how like corporate vet med has become, sometimes you get a little like scared away. But I think those two organizations were kind of like the two key ones in my experience of vet school.
Yeah, that business, VBMA does a great job with that business experience, and it is so important, right? Yes,
Hmm.
definitely if you want to consider being a practice owner, but also just when you're dealing with clients, right? And I think
Yeah.
having parents that own a business or are entrepreneurial, I had the same thing. It's a different sort of approach, and it shows you a different
Hmm.
viewpoint on things versus just working for somebody.
Yeah.
And that can be really helpful when you're dealing with clients for sure, and in your veterinary journey.
Yeah. It definitely taught me a lot, a lot of
Yeah.
different perspectives being in that, and I'm thankful for that being, I think, more important, like
Hmm.
and push now, in our like education and in the club systems too. So
Hmm.
that was super helpful.
So obviously, this was not the school experience you were probably expecting when you applied. And it sounds like that first year was fully online, right? What was the
Yeah.
second year like?
Second year was kind of half and half.
Hmm.
So we actually, I think we started back in person, and that was like the first time we had ever seen each other as a class. So that was like a little weird. Of you're like, oh, I never saw her before. Like, what's your name? So
Right, right.
a lot of people were meeting each other for the first time, and oh, I forgot to mention too, I was also the president of the class of 2024, and so like I had made it a goal to try and reach out to people as much as I could. And so for me, they were like, "Oh, like that's this is what you look like."
Right.
So that was like good to actually meet the put names to faces. And then we went back online for, I think, like half, the other half, or like a quarter of the year, and then we came back into
Hmm.
person. Um, and then third year, the since COVID, they kind of made it more of an online like hybrid curriculum. So you would have surgery lab in person, but then you had these like self-driven modules that were online. So we were kind of online again in third year, and so, and then fourth year we had clinics. But I majority of my vet school, honestly, like I think was mostly spent online because it was all first year, half a second year, and like half a third year too. So it's
Wow.
kind of
So
crazy.
that's a totally different experience, and I'm sure that you had envisioned
Mm.
since fourth grade. And
Yes.
and so do you think, I mean, I was gonna say, are there ways that your school experience could have been improved? I'm sure it could have been because it was
Mhm.
online, which is not ideal. So what sort of ways do you think that it could have been improved within the parameters of COVID? Or is there communication, or what ways do you think, looking back on it now, we should say you've just graduated, right? So you've just
Yes.
graduated in class in 2024. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And so looking back on it, where do you see room for improvement?
Yeah, so we were actually the third class to experience this new type of curriculum. Michigan State had just transitioned from their legacy curriculum to their flipped classroom curriculum. So they were still kind of like working out the kinks, and then COVID hit. So it was kind of like a double whammy of trying to work out the kinks while also being transitioning to this online format. So the flipped classroom setting is supposed to be where you spend like most of the night before prepping for your classes, and then you have like 2 hours in lecture where you kind of like go over in like a case-based setting what you learned the day before, and then it's all systems courses. So everything's divided by like cardiology and like radiology, and like you find or like musculoskeletal, and then everything within those systems is taught like in categories. So it's like pathologies within that system, but like only within the heart for cardiology. So that's kind of how it was divided. And I think like with every school, like there was always some definitely areas of improvement. And then for ours, namely, I would say like the pharmacology is where we struggled with communication, because I think in making of the new curriculum, we had an intro to pharmacology, and the professors in the systems courses were like under the impression that that would kind of cover like more in depth of the drugs. And I think within the intro classes we got like the mechanism of action and kind of like the basics, and then those professors were under in like intention that the systems courses would then build on that. And I think that there was some communication that was lost in the making of the new curriculum, and so we kind of lost on the pharmacology. And I don't think we really like realized that until we got to clinics. And the more we talked with our professors, and the more they kept asking us questions on like how to treat the animals, and then the more we studied for NAVLE, we were like, oh, I think that there could be more that could be done. And so definitely as president of the class, like I tried to speak up. And I know MSU is trying to they hired a curriculum consultant, and so they are like trying to fill those gaps, because I think they did realize that once we got to clinics we were like, oh shoot, like we don't know as much about like drugs as we should. And so I think they are really trying to put in the efforts to try and fill those gaps that were realized. But I think like a lot of schools, COVID kind of like just heightened things that needed to be like recognized and made aware. And so I guess in that aspect, it was a positive as well, because it kind of brought light to the things that could be improved upon within the curriculum, and kind of made us realize too, as vet students, where our weaknesses were. And during clinics, that kind of brought light to that as well. And we had more conversations with people, and I think now it'll be a little bit better for the incoming classes.
So did you feel like you were able to catch up on that?
I think that now I feel a little bit better. But for me, I guess like studying for NAVLE, there was a lot of things that I like had seen for the first time, which was kind of discouraging, which I think created a real challenge studying for the first time, because I just felt so overwhelmed by like the amount of information. So I actually decided kind of halfway through vet school to pursue a rotating internship, just because I felt as though there was like so much more to learn. And whether that was because of the like education aspect, or just like studying for NAVLE and realizing like the vast amount of information of every type of species in vet med. I think that I still have a ways to go, but I'm more ahead of where I was after studying for the NAVLE 2 times. So I think that kind of brought me more, I would say, like a deepening knowledge of it. And then having the rotating internship, we have another rotation in anesthesia and another kind of rotation of, it's almost like a repeat of clinics. So to me,
Right.
I was like, this is comforting knowing that like I'll have another time to learn more deeper, because I think that whether it be COVID, whether it be different things, I think that that was like for me, a weakness. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's completely understandable based on the
Yeah.
situation, right?
Mhm.
You mentioned NAVLE, and I know that for a lot of students that were in school around your time frame, it
Mhm.
has been very challenging for them to pass.
Yes.
And we've seen lower passing NAVLE rates than we've definitely seen in a long time. I don't know. I don't have the data to say if ever, but it's definitely something that we're hearing about through our Vets for Vets program. There's definitely students who are reaching out and are dismayed. So, what was, if you're up for it, we'd love to hear sort of your NAVLE experience, because I'm sure there's many listeners who would connect with that.
Yeah, so I did not pass the first time, and it was very like soul crushing for me because I think being in this profession, we're all like perfectionists and like people pleasers, and then like getting that failing score, you're just like it was like a punch in the gut, and you
Yeah.
start to question your like intelligence, you start to question like whether or not you're like worthy enough to like be in this profession. So it definitely sent me down a tough road, and I think ultimately, like I'm glad that that happened because I think it made me realize some things that I wouldn't have had I not been knocked down. But it was really hard to get that, and it's really hard too when you're in clinic surrounded by other people that like have passed. And for me, I guess I was lucky because a lot of my classmates did not pass, so I didn't feel as alone. Which unfortunately is just the trend of there's just increasingly amount of people that don't pass. But I just feel like
Mm-hmm.
there's this like stigma still
Mm-hmm.
of like it's so you just feel so embarrassed when you don't pass. And um, I think it's just like important to like acknowledge that like there's so many people that are in the same boat as the people that failed. And like I think for me it was just like getting over that embarrassment of like I'm not alone. And we all kind of like teamed together as students that didn't pass and ended up using it to study together. But it was really hard to come out, especially when even in like within my friend group, like half of us passed and half of us failed. And so it kind of created this like divide unmeaningfully, but like
Right.
it just happened. And so that was really hard. Once January, we got it January 18th, I remember. It was my dad's birthday, so I remember I was like, I waited until after dinner because I was like, I'm so, and I feel like I like disappointed my parents, and so it was just a very like tough time. But and like I said, I think taking it, I'm someone that like struggles with anxiety, and so that was really hard, just like feeling so overwhelmed. And so
Mm-hmm.
having all that information that I was seeing for the first time, I felt like I never truly like sat down and like focused because I was just so nervous because like it's this
Mm-hmm.
huge thing and everyone makes such a big deal about it. And even like the schools, whether they mean to or not, are like so pressuring on you about it. And they're like, you need to pass, you need to pass, you need to pass. And then like you never get a time to like take a breath and just be like, okay, like it's just an exam, even though it's like
Mm-hmm.
a really big exam, but
Right, right.
um, it's just another one of the exams. And so I think like not passing the first time kind of made me take a step back and like I went back to therapy and like tried to get my mental health back under control. I met up with some professors about like study tips, and then I started to like eat better, sleep better, like try to exercise more, and like just like change my mindset overall. Of like it's not the end of the world. Like there's an end to the tunnel, and like there's you're not the only one that's experiencing this. And I think that helped me get through it, but it was tough.
Yeah, that must have been so tough. And it's interesting what you're saying about friends and, it sort of divided you
Yeah.
unintentionally, right? Because half of you are like, great, we're continuing on. And the other half of you are like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, this is something we still really need to focus on, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I can imagine that was definitely very challenging. So you mentioned that like that you felt like you really focused on taking better care of yourself and sleeping and exercising. And do you feel like there were helpful resources you needed while going through NAVLE, while in veterinary school, or are there
Mhm.
ones that you feel like you wish you had but you didn't?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely a lot, which is good, but it's all about like how you utilize it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that was a learning experience for me as well. Because I think going into it, the way that our curriculum is set up, we had not taken a cumulative exam in like a really long time. And so the approach to try and figure out how to study for a cumulative exam was really tough as well. And so there was different ways that um, sitting down with my professor, she was like, okay, like, let's budget out your time differently. Let's focus more on like how you best study.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was really helpful for like utilizing the professors that you have as a resource. Cause I think we often forget, like, for me, I'm always like intimidated by authority. And so I think that made me realize, like, oh, they're here to help us. So the professors were definitely very willing to help and like sit us down. And then VIN has a NAVLE course that kind of outlines like different like study guides and has you focus on the different like species. And so that was super helpful. So I think, and then like vet prep and Zuku. But I think the first time I
Mm-hmm.
did that, like I kind of tried to reach the 80%, like it says that you're supposed to. And I think by doing that, I ended up hurting myself because I was like so focused on like just getting through the questions and not actually like taking the time to learn. And so again, it just came down to like the mental health, I think, overall, and like being able to reach out. And then like one of the resources is like Vets for Vets, and so I reached out to them, and that was through the VIN NAVLE course. They like advertise it through there. And so I think the more people that I talk to, I realized like, oh, I'm not alone, and like that was comforting. And then
Mm-hmm.
I went back to therapy as well, and that was offered through MSU CAP. So I set that
That's
up through
great.
there. So that was
Yeah.
good for the school to be able to have that as a resource. I do wish, as like something that could be like added, that there was kind of more of like a prep course for like just like how to manage like the anxiety of the exam,
Mm-hmm.
like either through the school. I think that like Ben does a really good job of. I'm not just saying that because I'm on the podcast, but I think Ben does a really good job of like providing resources
Mm-hmm.
for mental health and for the actual like studying and how to like portion your time and portion like which species. But I think like vet schools can sometimes provide a little bit more resources when it comes to mental health, of just like this exam is so big and so like dependent on like your, just like you feel like it's like the end of the world like if you don't
Mm-hmm.
pass it, and like you can't move on with your life. And I feel like providing that like just like safe space of like being able to be like, okay, like if you feel like here's what you can do, and being like not being like you have to just so like pressure inducing, I feel like that just makes it more anxiety ridden. So having some sort of course of like how do you manage anxiety going into the exam, because it's 7 hours long, like there's not there's no exam where you're going to be sitting there for 7 hours like besides, so nothing can
Right.
prepare you for that. You just have to like build up your stamina. But um I think that we're getting there in the vet profession of like having more resources for mental health for sure. But there's always room for
Always
more, I think.
right. Always room for improvement.
Yeah.
It sounds like your veterinary school experience had a lot of opportunity for learning. Obviously, you're in school,
Mhm.
so learning that way, but just life learning. So, what was or what were a few of your top lessons you learned while in veterinary school?
Yeah, I think the one that I kind of touched on was like never be afraid to ask for help from your professors, because like
Mm-hmm.
they are there for you and they are there to help you. And so asking them and like picking their brain, even about their career path. Like my one professor, she made me realize kind of that I wanted to do the rotating internship because she didn't do it the typical way and she didn't apply for match. And so I didn't even know that was like possible without talking to her. So I learned that you don't have to do the match program, like it opens up to the public. And that's actually how I got into the rotating internship that I'm going to be doing, is just by asking and waiting for a spot to open, basically. So, which I never would have known if I didn't talk to her. Um, and then the other thing too is just like you don't have to have a 4.0 to like specialize in anything, because I think I went in thinking that you had to have a 4.0 and you had to be at the top of your class. And there's different ways of like there's so many different pathways that you can go, and so don't like sell yourself short. I think that's like a big thing too, is just making sure that you're never afraid to ask questions, but then also like believe in yourself too, because I think that that's hard to do when you're surrounded by all these smart people. that are like very much go-getters. And then the other thing too is that like this profession is so small, so just like keep talking to people, and it'll eventually, if something's not open that you want, like it'll eventually open up, because there's just so many the same faces that you'll see over and over again in different conferences. So I think that that's a big one, is just like keep networking, and like that'll open doors for you like for the future, just because there's so few people, even though it is like there's so many things you can do, there's like so few people that end up you interact with, that you never know when the door is going to open, and you never know who's going to open it for you.
So you're about to start a rotating internship. What was that experience for you, like getting that?
It was really interesting because it wasn't like the typical pathway that most
Which
people
is
take.
perfect. I mean, I think
Yeah.
people understanding that you don't have to go the typical path, right?
Yeah.
It's important to understand that there's other ways.
Yeah, which I never knew. And so I actually kind of just waited until it opened up to the public. And then I just emailed every single practice in the area that I was going to be moving to. So I had just like found out that my fiance was going to be like working in North Carolina, and so I emailed all the clinics within North Carolina and was like, "Hey, I'm interested in doing this internship. Like, do you have a spot open?" And so one of them did have a spot open, and so I went and I toured there, and it would actually this one would have been in Charlotte, and so it would have been an hour, no, 2 hours away from where I had just signed an apartment lease, so that would have been a little bit difficult. And then a couple weeks later, I was in Italy and I got an email saying that another position had opened up at one of the clinics I had emailed that was like right down the street from my apartment. And so I wrote my personal statement on the airplane there, because I got it like the day before we left. So I wrote my personal statement on the airplane. It literally was like that Robert Frost quote about the path less travel, because I was like, this is very much not a path that I like ever thought would happen or thought would be possible. And then ended up interviewing while I was in Italy, and then was able to get offered the position. And then another unique thing is I'm actually starting behind the rest of the intern class. So I'll be starting July 5th, and everyone else started June 10th. So it is possible to start after, and like some of them are flexible. So I'm at a private practice, so they were like, it's okay for you to start later, which was also something I never thought would happen, but it did. So you never truly know what
Right.
is open
Those are
to
very
you.
good lessons.
Yeah.
Those are and you never know if you don't ask. And
Yeah.
those, different paths can always work out. So
Mhm.
as a recent grad, what is one piece of advice you would give a colleague starting veterinary school, or something you had wished you had known when starting?
I think for me, it was like, just don't sell yourself short. Because I think like even applying to vet school, there was places that I didn't apply to because I was like, oh, again, like I was like, this is my GPA, like I don't have a chance. And there were so many people that I ended up talking to like after I got in, and I was like, oh, I like definitely could have like had a shot, and I just didn't think I could. And so I think like what you might think would be like a mundane fact, like could be like really, really interesting to someone. And you never know until you put yourself out there. So just don't be afraid to do that. And like, don't assume that like the rest of the world views you the way that you view yourself. Cause a lot of times I think we're our biggest critic, and we're a lot harder on ourselves than most people are. So I think like being able to just like send that email. Like you never know. The worst I could say is no. So just putting yourself out there and not doubting your abilities is something that I wish I knew going into it sooner.
I think that's great. I think
You
that's very helpful for probably pre-vet students about to start, and
know?
probably students that are in, and also just a good lesson in general in life, right? I mean, because we all go through ebb and flows of doubting ourselves and unsure if we can do things. And, I am definitely older than you, so I wish I could tell you it goes away. It doesn't. I think you learn how to recognize it and manage it, but we're always going to have those moments, right? So is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with today, Alexia?
I think there's two books I just read recently that I thought they had a really good lesson. The first one is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F-U-C-K. I won't curse on the
Got it.
And then the second one is Grit by Angela Duckworth. I had to look at it.
Okay.
And in both of them, I think the messages are like super similar. And basically is that the people in this world that have become super successful did not get that way by not making any mistakes. They have all failed multiple times. They've all fallen on their face multiple times. And that's the only way that they learn to get better. So I think that the most important thing to take away from this, and like why I wanted to share my story about failing NAVLE, is that it's of how we react to our failures and how we take those and make it into something better and kind of sit there and reflect on it. And then instead of moping around, like you always have the option and you are in control of how you react to it. So there's always something that you can do. And so just leaving everyone with that of it's not always about, I guess, like the smartest person in the room. Sometimes it's just how much effort you you want to put in there and how much you want to pick yourself up when you fall. I think that's the real value in things, is just being able to get up after you get knocked down. So
those are fantastic life lessons that we're regularly learning over and over again. And I completely agree. And that's, we don't learn when we get things right. We learn when we fail, and we are, regularly failing. And as I told my husband on our first date, like I am a work in progress. So that's always trying to be a better human, but like we're failing and trying to improve. And that's where I think we all have the opportunity to become better humans and regularly see things better in life. So I do like to ask people, do you have a secret talent or something you enjoy doing that others might not know about? And I always find it interesting when I ask this question because I'm just always so surprised by the answers. So how about you?
Yeah, I really had to think about this one. I think that for me, I think my secret talent would be like finding really good local food places.
Boom, I love it.
So, and like local events. One of the things that my roommate was pretty introverted and I was pretty extroverted. And so the thing that we had the most fun with is like, I would be able to find all these local like farmers markets or local like vendor like crafts markets. Mm-hmm. And she would be like, I'm glad that we're living together because you really pushed me out of my comfort zone and like get me outside. So I really like going to new places and finding their local like breweries or local whatever food vendors and different farmers markets and different things that they have. And also finding coupons for those things too, because I'm a big bargain person, and I would like to one day start a blog about like saving money on different ways.
You're welcome to write a blog post for the foundation if you like.
Yeah. I'm like, when it's your birthday, you can get all these things for free. And so I send that to all my friends too.
There you go. So are you also one of those people that will read the reviews and order based on what the reviews say of the local food places?
Oh, yes. Yeah. My fiance and I just went on a beach trip to Wilmington, and it was literally just by me like going on like TripAdvisor, cross-referencing it with like reels on Instagram and being like, okay, like what food place? So the whole time he's like, okay, what are we doing next? And I was like, let me reference my my list and my reviews. So.
I love
People do read them if you do.
They do. They totally do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Alexia, for taking the time to talk with us and to share your story. And I know that you are in the midst of a move, and congratulations on getting engaged. And this is a really exciting time in your life. And so wishing you all the best. And we, of course, always welcome you to come back and share more of your story. And thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you. And for everybody that we've, all the things we've talked about, as always, they will always be in the episode notes. So we'll put links to the stuff that Alexia mentioned in the episode notes. Thanks, Alexia.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Veterinary Pulse. Please check the episode notes for additional information referenced in the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share review. We welcome feedback and hope you will tune in again. You can find out more about the VIN Foundation through our website, vinfoundation.org, and our social media channels. Thank you for being here. Be well.